Okay, when we look at in our 10th year, we really see a contrast with the poems that have come before. And if you followed the poetry chronologically in the order in which they're written in the anthology, you come across this poem and you wonder whether it can be by Simon Armitage at all. Because we've had About His Person, about a dead man; Alaska, about a woman who's left; Gooseberry Season, about a man who, along with his son, drowns the lodger; and Hitcher, about a man who beats another man to death with a crooklock. And then you get this very tender, very beautiful, very lyrical poem about memory, about moving on, about time, and about how we need to let things go to move on in our lives. So I'm going to read it through, and then I'll spend a little while just kind of thinking about the poem itself and what we learn about the narrator. This book, this page, this harebell laid to rest between these sheets, these leaves, if pressed, still bleeds a watercolour of the way we were. Those years, the fuss of such and such a day, that disagreement and its final word, your inventory of names and dates and times, my inventories of tall, dark, handsome lies. A decade on, now we astound ourselves, still two, still twinned but doubled now with love, and for a single night apart alone, how sure we are, each of the other half. This harebell holds its own. Let's give it now in air, with light, the chance to fade, to fold. Here, take it from my hand, now, let it go. So you can see straight away, massive contrast. First main contrast is the language that's used. It's very soft, it's very gentle, it's very poetic. It's filled with self-consciously almost poetic language, but it works. It's a great poem. For me, it's one of my favourite poems in the anthology. So let's look at this first stanza. Look at the repetition, the triplet, this book, this page, this harebell laid to rest. Notice the move from a wider, kind of a wide angle, a long shot if you like, I suppose, down to a close-up. It's what poetry does really, really well. It takes you from a broad view into this sort of close-up view, a book, to a page, to the harebell. The harebell is the flower that's been pressed inside the book. The harebell laid to rest between these sheets, these leaves, if pressed still bleeds a watercolour of the way we were. So this flower pressed between the sheets of the book, and if you press on it, you still get that memory of the way they were. The watercolour, for me, the watercolour suggests a couple of things. It suggests the way in which the flower itself can bleed onto the page, can actually mark the page of the book. But also the idea of a watercolour being slightly faint and indistinct and the edges being blurred, and the memory being that watercolour, that sort of blurred-edged watercolour of the way we were, of our past. So that first stanza sets up the sense of the past, of the way things were, and the harebell is somehow a symbol of that. That fragility, I suppose, that sort of gentleness and that beauty. And then we contrast it with that second stanza, those years, and we get that colon. Colons, it's important here. If you see colons in poetry, have a think about why they're there. The colon and the two dots after those years. The fuss of such and such a day, that disagreement and its final word. That's normal life, isn't it? The fuss of such and such a day. Look at the contrast in the sounds of the language there, between the first stanza and fuss of such and such a day. We have that's what's called sibilance. Sibilance, sibilance. It's the repetition of the S sound. Those years, the fuss of such and such a day. There's that kind of fussiness there which contrasts with the first stanza. In the second podcast, I'll go on and talk a little bit more about the second half of the poem.